Good evening, everyone. We'll make a start if that's okay. Sorry for any adverts in them.
Every month, I ask students on our Telegram channel about the questions they were asked in their IELTS speaking exams. I've analyzed all the topics from recent exams, and today I'd like to show you what topics and questions students get asked and how you can improve your answers to these questions to achieve a higher score. It's Asi here. Let's get started. Let's be original and begin with IELTS speaking part 1. At the very beginning, the examiner asks you several short questions to verify your identity. These include, what's your full name? Where are you from? What should I call you? These questions are always the same and we've discussed them in depth in this video here, linked below. The introductory part is short. After that, you'll be asked questions on 3 topics.
Glenn's just used Confused.com and doesn't have the thought of home insurance weighing him down anymore.
Can't believe we're getting married.
You're not getting married.
Insurance feels better when you've just used Confused.
Here is our list of topics reported by students. So what can we learn from it? First of all, look at the top 3. Home, hometown, work or studies. These are the topics every student gets asked about at the beginning of their exam, right after the introduction. There is not much variety here. If your topic is home, the first question is, do you live in a house or a flat? And subsequent questions will depend on your answer. If it's your hometown, the examiner will say, let's talk about your hometown. Do you live in a city or a village? A hometown is a place where you were born or lived for a long time as a child. For instance, I've been living in London for 12 years, but my hometown is Almaty in Kazakhstan. If you lived in 2 or several different places, it's up to you to choose which one you want to talk about. If the topic is work or studies, the first question will be, do you work or study? These initial questions allow the examiner to ask you correct follow-up questions. Your answers to the first question should be relatively short, 1, 2, or maybe 3 sentences max. For example, do you live in a house or a flat? I could say, it's been about 2 months since I moved into a house. Before that, I had only lived in flats. Or for, do you work or study? I'm studying for my master's degree in civil engineering, and I'm really looking forward to graduating this summer. These initial answers don't have to be long, so don't feel like you have to start talking a lot because the examiner will probably just interrupt you. There will be other questions that require more extended answers. And although you can figure out what questions you're gonna get at the beginning of your exam, you definitely should not memorize your answers. You should practice, but make sure that your answers come across as natural and you speak with the same rhythm and intonation as you're gonna speak in the rest of your exam. Memorized answers are very easy to spot and examiners won't award you any points for those. To encourage you to speak without a lot of previous preparation,
Insurance feels better when you've just used Confused.com.
some of the questions are likely to be less predictable. For example, if you work, you may be asked, what are your working hours? Or how do you travel to work? If it's about your hometown, what would you want to change about it? I guess you can already see how you can give longer answers. For example, I could say, I wish more could be done to improve the air quality in the city. Almaty is surrounded by beautiful mountains, but because it's so protected from the wind and the population and the number of cars are growing fast, the air is becoming more and more polluted every year, particularly in winter. So this answer is a bit longer and uses slightly more complex vocabulary and grammar than our first answers. But generally, the first topic is to warm you up, to help you settle in. And then you're going to be asked questions on 2 other topics. And here we have a much greater variety. Some classic topics have been used for years and continue to be used today. For instance, books, films, music, weekends, and wild animals. I was actually asked about this topic in one of my exams, and it caught me completely off guard because it felt like those questions were for small kids. So be prepared. Other topics are more unusual. Advertisements, ambitions, bags, fixing things, geography, helping others, ice cream, maps, rain, and video games. Although students reported that they were asked about these topics in real exams, it doesn't mean that's what you're gonna get. Some questions get dropped and some come back. We see it clearly because topics we covered a couple of years ago are used again today. But the aim of this video is to show you the range so you know what to expect and not to predict topics for your test. So, what kind of questions can you expect? The first question to each topic is usually quite general. Let's talk about ambitions. Do you consider yourself an ambitious person? Here is a sample answer. Yes, I think I'm pretty ambitious. I mean, I always try to push myself to the limits in whatever I do. If you don't aim high, then you'll never realize your dreams. This answer is great because it shows some topic-specific vocabulary or words we specifically use to talk about ambitions. Here are some of them. To push yourself to the limits, to work very, very hard. To aim high is to be very ambitious and to try to be the best. To realize your dreams, to make your dreams a reality. And the second question usually tests a certain skill. For example, what did you want to be when you were younger? This question invites you to talk about the past. Or, where do you see yourself in 10 years? The future. These questions invite you to use certain grammatical structures in order to talk about the past and future. For example, a common mistake is mixing up the present perfect and past simple. Compare these. The question is the same. What did you want to be when you were younger? I've always dreamed of becoming a doctor. I dreamt of becoming a doctor. I used to dream of becoming a doctor. Can you feel the difference? Have dreamt is in the present perfect. This means that I'm either a doctor, starting to become a doctor, or still dreaming about it. For example, yes, I've always dreamt of becoming a doctor, and now I'm on the 2nd year of my medical degree. I dreamt means you don't dream about it anymore. Similarly, I used to dream means that this is a past aspiration that is no longer true. Like in this answer. I used to dream of becoming a doctor when I was young, but in my late teens, I completely abandoned this idea when I realized how many years I would need to study and how tough it would be to work as a doctor in a hospital. In the answer to this simple question, there are several grammatical structures you can choose from, and examiners do check if you use them correctly. Coming back to our topics. One of the goals of these less common topics is to see the width of your vocabulary. Most test takers can talk about their day or their house, But can you talk about something like repairing things? Our question is, are you good at fixing things? This answer invites you to use some topic-specific vocabulary. Here is a model answer. I'm pretty good at repairing most things around the house. I'm good with my hands and I have a toolkit with all you need, screwdrivers and so on. So simple plumbing jobs like fixing a leaking tap or something similar I can do. But one thing I don't touch is electrics. Anything to do with wires scares me a lot. There are a lot of topic-related words in this answer, right? Let's have a look at them. A toolkit is a box containing tools for repairing or making things. A screwdriver is a tool used for turning or driving screws. Plumbing, that's the system required to supply water or heating, like pipes, boiler, radiators. Leaking. When water is dripping from a tap or a pipe, it's leaking. And a tap is where your water is coming from in the bathroom. Wires. Electrical wires conduct electricity. And we also have a couple of idiomatic phrases. You can say that someone is good with their hands if they're skillful. And one thing I don't touch. This means that's something I never do. But in our case, quite literally, it's better to never touch electrical wiring. This answer would definitely score high for lexical resource, even though it doesn't have any big complicated words. But it shows that the student can express thoughts with precision and natural control. This is a band 9 answer. Probably you don't know as many topic-specific words, but as long as you can talk about the subject freely enough, you should still be able to get a band 6, 7 or even 8. But if you do have some time before your exam, it's great to expand your vocabulary and practice your answers to common and less common topics. This particular answer is coming from our IELTS speaking library. This is a collection of sample answers and advanced vocabulary to over 40 topics used in real IELTS speaking exams. And it covers a number of topics from our today's list as well. I'll link it in the description. Okay, 5 minutes and 3 topics later, your part 1 is done. Now it's time for part 2. That's where the task says you should speak on a given topic between 1 and 2 minutes. But ideally, you should try to speak for the full 2 minutes until your time is up and the examiner stops you. What topics can you get here? It seems that most of them can be categorized into 3 groups. You may be asked to describe an object or a place. For example, describe a book you've read many times, an item of clothing you like wearing, a park or garden you like visiting, an invention you find useful, or a job you would like to do. And a topic that's been popular for a long time, a water sport you'd like to learn. The second group of topics is to describe a person. Describe someone you know who is successful in life. Or describe a friend from your childhood, or someone who recently moved to a new place. There are fewer topics here, but the most popular category among our replies was to describe an occasion or experience. For example, describe an occasion you heard someone complaining about something, or you had an interesting conversation with an elderly person, or your travel plans were cancelled, or you got lost. One of the common problems or fears that students have is that they won't know what to say or they will struggle to speak for long enough. How can we address those? Well, let me show you by looking at a topic that most of my students voted for as the most challenging. Describe a person who loves to grow plants. Here, it's important to read the topic carefully and think about what it actually asks you about. It's not asking you to describe how to grow plants. Yes, if you know some topic-specific vocabulary, it's great and you should definitely add it to your answer. But that's not the main purpose of the answer. The focus is on talking about a person. Have a look at the bullet points first. Who the person is, how you know this person. These 2 bullet points don't mention plants at all. Then there is one which asks about what type of plants he or she grows. But it doesn't tell you that you must go into a lot of detail. And the last bullet point is quite key. Explain why growing plants is important for this person. This last bullet point allows you to use more complex grammatical structures in your explanation, so you should always try to cover it. But overall, out of 4 bullet points, only 1 talks about plants directly. Sometimes, to find a good story to tell, you just need to reframe the question for yourself a little bit. In our case, what kind of plants can we talk about? This might be about houseplants or gardening, growing flowers or fruit and vegetables, planting trees or farming. For example, my mom loves growing orchids at home, and my friend's husband is a farmer. I could talk about either of them. One way to approach the task when you don't really know what to say is to describe each bullet point in a paragraph. That's exactly what we did in this sample answer. We have a paragraph about the person, my neighbor, then a little story about how I met him, a paragraph about what type of plants he grows. So in this paragraph, there is indeed some topic-specific vocabulary because this is a model answer. But if you don't know specific words, you could give a more general answer. After all, you don't need the maximum IELTS score to pass, right? So your answer doesn't have to be perfect. And the last paragraph is explaining why growing plants is important for him. I find that sometimes following those bullet points is an easy way to give a coherent answer, like in this case. If you'd like to read this answer, please pause the video now. In other cases, some of the bullet points may not help you. For example, if I chose to speak about my mom, I would hardly give a paragraph about how I met her, right? In this case, you can concentrate on telling the story and addressing the main question at the top. And as I mentioned before, also the last bullet point explain why. And if you manage to speak for 2 minutes, the examiner will stop you when your time is up. Don't worry if you don't finish the story. However, if you run out of things to say and there is a little bit of time left, the examiner may ask you 1 or 2 short follow-up questions at the end. For instance, would you like to start growing some plants yourself? These questions still belong to part 2. Your part 3 begins when the examiner tells you, now it's time for part 3. Indeed, it's time to talk about it. And arguably, this is the most important part of your exam. IELTS speaking part 3. Just like in part 1, the examiner will be asking you questions, and this part will last between 4 and 5 minutes. But there are some significant differences. First of all, the approach to questions is different. Questions will be somehow related to your part 2 topic. For example, if your part 2 was to describe an occasion when you borrowed something from a friend, then in part 3, the examiner will have 3 sets of questions in front of them. These might be sharing things, sharing feelings, and sharing intellectual property. Basically, sharing or not sharing valuable information between companies or governments. Unlike part 1, where examiners read questions from a list, in part 3, they formulate questions themselves. And in our example, talking about sharing things is easier than about copyright and intellectual property. So depending on your performance, examiners will choose 2 sets of questions for you. The easier set 1 and 2, or the more difficult 2 and 3. And before we look at some sample answers, here are the topics from part 3. As you can see, they are related to part 2, but take a more serious twist. A conversation with an elderly person may turn into questions about the retirement age and generation gap, or part 2 about parks into sustainability in agriculture and food waste. And students usually don't remember questions because they tend to be quite long. So if you'd like to read all the topics or save them by taking a print screen, pause the video now. Let's come back to our topic about sharing and check if you make this common mistake. The question is from the first set, the easier set. Is it important for children to share things with other people? And the answer is, think if it's a good answer. Yes, I think it's very important. When I was little, I had a friend who really didn't like to share her bicycle with me, but she always wanted me to share my toys with her, and so on. Was it a good answer? Not really. This is not the style of answer you should give in part 3. It would be okay in part 1 because part 1 is more personal. These are questions about your life and your experiences. Part 3 is more abstract. It's about general questions and problems. That's why in part 3, you should try to give more abstract answers about people in general instead of using yourself or your friends as examples. Here is one way to answer this question. Yes, I can think of some very good reasons why children should be taught how to share with others. It helps them show that possessions are not everything. For instance, if one kid has a toy and another one doesn't, then sharing that toy will be fun for both of them. And although they may not be aware of this, it builds friendship and trust. When you meet adults who haven't learned how to share, you can see how selfish they've become, and that can make their lives pretty miserable because nobody wants to spend time with someone selfish. Anyway, it's always much better and more effective to do things together. Have you noticed the length? Part 3 answers can be up to a minute long. If it's shorter, the examiner can also ask some follow-up questions to help you extend your answers. But try to do your part. What can you talk about? The examiner is looking for your ability to weigh pros and cons and provide reasoned arguments or opinions, using examples or evidence where appropriate. Let me show you how to use examples without making them personal. Our set 2 question about sharing feelings is, what problems does it cause when people aren't very good at sharing their feelings? Here is one way to answer. Yes, that's a difficult question. I mean, a lot of people in my country are not so good in this respect. They're not at all open, and that can give other people the wrong impression. If you don't say how you feel, how are others going to understand you? A lot of people are very shy and are afraid to express themselves. So they often give the impression that they're just not interested in what someone is saying. Or if you just keep all your feelings inside, there may be a moment when you just explode and say or do something you will regret. So it's important to manage your feelings properly. Okay, to avoid making your answers too personal, you can still take examples from people you know and generalize them. If the examiner thinks you're particularly strong and are likely to get a band 7, 8 or 9, they will ask you the most challenging questions from set 3. In our case, sharing intellectual property. Do you think it's important for scientists and companies to share their research? Here is my answer. Well, I suppose in theory, definitely yes. If we're talking about making things better and about scientific progress, then we should share knowledge. For example, if a pharmaceutical company makes an important breakthrough and produces a vaccine or medicine that saves lives, then it should be shared. We've just seen that. Of course, any kind of cooperation and sharing requires a lot of trust. Maybe in university research it's more open because academics do share their research through publications and conferences, while companies tend to keep their knowledge secret so they can make money out of what they call their intellectual property. Remember that the examiner is only interested in your use of English, not if your answer is factually correct or very profound. The IELTS speaking exam can indeed feel intense, with questions coming one after another. Some students have shared that examiners kept on interrupting them, which can be quite distracting and intimidating. However, in most cases, that's because examiners need to manage time. When preparing for your exam, practice with a timer to understand how long your answers should be. In my courses, students receive practice tests where questions are automatically timed, allowing them to learn the appropriate length for each answer. Of course, during the test, some answers can be longer and some shorter, but that's still very helpful. When the next question comes, it's important to switch immediately and leave the previous question unfinished. You can organize similar practice sessions for yourself at home using both classic topics and more challenging questions. You can download a PDF with questions only on our Telegram channel and questions with sample answers and vocabulary in our IELTS speaking library, both linked in the description. And if you'd like to learn some useful phrases to extend your Part 3 answers, watch this video here. Thank you so much for watching me today. Good luck with your preparation and your exam. Bye!
Hi everyone. Let me just line up the next one, please. Sorry for the delay.
additional details. Also, remember to think about your fluency, using a range of vocabulary that relates to the topic, using a range of grammar structures and sentence types, and showing good pronunciation.
Insurance feels better when you've just used Confused.com.
Okay, so now it's time for you to practice part 2. Make sure you have a pen and paper and a recording device to record your speaking. Are you ready? Here we go. Now I'm going to give you a topic and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you speak, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say. You can make some notes if you wish. Please use a pen and paper for your notes, and here's your topic. I'd like you to describe a time where you enjoyed sharing a meal with a friend.
Insurance feels better when you've just used Confused.com.
You now have 2 minutes for this. Can you start speaking now, please?
Insurance feels better when you've just used Confused.com.
Thank you. How was that? Did you manage to make a few notes in the 1 minute prep time? It goes quickly, right? And did you manage to speak for the full 2 minutes? Let me show you how I would answer this part 2 task. During the prep time, with only enough time to write a few words, this is what I would write. For who, I'd jot down the name, in this case my friend Alex. For where, We ate in a Chinese restaurant. What we ate was a vegetarian hot pot. Notice the use of abbreviation here. That's a good trick for writing notes quickly. And why I enjoyed it? Well, I hadn't seen Alex in 3 years, so it was a chance to reconnect and reminisce. Notice I'm noting some strong vocab here. And I also enjoyed it because it showed our friendship is still strong. And now I'll give my full response. Listen for my use of vocabulary and grammar structures, how I develop the topic and link my ideas, and my pronunciation. I'm going to talk about a time when I really enjoyed sharing a meal with a friend. It happened about a year ago when I met up with my old friend Alex. We'd been close in university, but after graduating, life got busy and we lost touch. In fact, it had been almost 3 years since we'd last seen each other, so we decided to catch up over dinner. We chose a cozy Chinese restaurant in the city that specialized in hot pot. It was a great choice because hot pot is such a social meal. You sit around a steaming pot, cooking your own food, and it naturally creates conversation. The atmosphere in the restaurant was warm and lively, with the sound of bubbling broth and people chatting all around us. We ordered a vegetarian hot pot, which was perfect because Alex is vegetarian. There was a huge variety of fresh ingredients: mushrooms, tofu, leafy greens, and noodles. I remember the spicy broth being absolutely delicious, and we kept adding more ingredients as we talked. The whole experience felt interactive, which made the meal even more enjoyable. What made the evening truly special was the chance for Alex and me to reconnect. We reminisced about our university days, shared stories about what we'd been up to, and laughed a lot. I felt like no time had passed at all. Even though we'd been apart for so long, our friendship was still as strong as ever. Since that night, we've stayed in touch more regularly, and we're actually planning another dinner soon. I think meals like this bring people together, not just for the food, but for the memories they create. Obviously, the content of your response will be quite different to mine, but you can see that I managed to talk for the full 2 minutes by developing my ideas. I used a variety of appropriate vocabulary and grammar structures, and hopefully I sounded fluent with good pronunciation. If you can do those things too, you'll do really well in this part. For more information on IELTS speaking scoring, head to e2language.com, and included in a range of IELTS test prep courses are methods videos that go into detail on all aspects of IELTS speaking band descriptors. Now it's time for part 3. Part 3 is where you have a discussion with the examiner. The examiner is going to ask you questions on 1 or 2 different topics that have some connection to what you just talked about in part 2. The questions you're asked in this section are more complex than the ones you're asked in part 1 of the test. Your answers are likely to be a bit longer too, so this is where you can give more detailed responses to questions. Instead of giving more factual information like you're asked for in part 1, part 3 questions ask you to respond in a more abstract way. For example, they may require you to justify an opinion, evaluate changes over time, speculate, assess the importance of something, compare and contrast, and so on. In part 3, you should speak from a more general and objective perspective. So for example, rather than talk about what you like, you should talk about what most people in your country like. The examiner will ask from 2 sets of questions, and this part of the test will take about 4 to 5 minutes. As with the other 2 parts of the speaking test, you'll be assessed on your fluency and coherence, your range of vocabulary and grammar structures, and your pronunciation. Remember, part 3 is about answering in a more general but in-depth way, so you need to make sure your responses are well developed. Here are my top tips for speaking part 3. Aim for between 20 and 40 seconds per answer. To develop your answers, think about giving what we call a 3-step answer to each question. For step 1, you should state your position, such as saying, I agree, I disagree, yes, no, or I think. In step 2, you can give a reason, explanation, outcome, and so on that supports your position. And then step 3 is where you can give an example. Even though there are no right or wrong answers, it's important you listen carefully to the questions because you need to make sure you're answering the actual question that you're being asked. And don't forget, your answers should be general and objective, so avoid giving personal answers and information. Okay, so now it's time for you to practice this part. I'm going to ask you one set of Part 3 questions, and you'll have time to answer. Remember to record your answers so you can go back and check how you went. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. We've been talking about a meal you enjoyed, and I'd like to ask you one or two more general questions related to this. Let's consider, first of all, changes in eating habits. How have eating habits changed over the past few decades? Culture.
Insurance feels better when you've just used confused.com.
Has affected the tradition of sharing meals? In what ways do people's eating habits differ between younger and older generations? Question.
Insurance feels better when you've just used confused.com.
To help you evaluate, you can compare your responses to how I respond. Listen for whether I answer the questions in a general way and whether I develop my answers. First question, how have eating habits changed over the past few decades? Well, eating habits have changed dramatically over the last few decades. People used to cook at home more often, but now with busy lifestyles, there's a shift towards convenience, which means people are eating more ready meals, takeaways, and eating out more. There's also been a big rise in health-conscious eating. You see more organic food, plant-based diets, and people cutting down on sugar. In saying that, ultra-processed foods are also more common than ever. For example, in many cities, you'll find fast food joints on every street corner, which wasn't really the case 30 years ago. If this trend continues, we might see even more health-related problems in the future. Second question, do you think fast food culture has affected the tradition of sharing meals? Yeah, I think so. Fast food has made eating more individualistic. People often grab a burger on the go instead of sitting down for a proper meal. Traditionally, meals were a social event, especially in cultures where family dinners were important. But now, with things like food delivery apps, people eat at different times in front of screens or even alone, even when they're in the same home. This kind of change is a bit of a shame and could have quite negative consequences on family dynamics especially. Third question, in what ways do people's eating habits differ between younger and older generations? There's definitely a contrast. Older generations tend to prefer home-cooked meals and traditional recipes, while younger people experiment more with different cuisines like Persian and Sri Lankan food or fusion food. Plus, young people often eat on the move, relying on fast food or meal prep services, whereas older people usually sit down for meals. Another big difference is social media. Young people are influenced by food trends online like superfoods or veganism. But one thing's for sure, both groups seem to be becoming more aware of the importance of nutrition for general health, which is a good thing for society overall. Did you answer in a similar way, with extended responses and objective ideas rather than personal experiences? If so, you're going to do well in this part. If you'd like more practice with IELTS speaking, head to e2language.com where you can find lots of practice materials as well as mock tests, assessments, and one-on-one tutorials. IELTS speaking can be challenging, but with practice, you'll be just fine. See you next time.
Hi everyone. I'm sorry about the adverts. I've found the secret though. If I'm not watching, I don't have that screen self this advert. Right, there's one final short one which I'll set up now.
Let's start off by talking about drinks. What's your favorite drink?
My favorite drink would be coffee. Every morning that I wake up, I have to have my coffee first before I even eat my breakfast, and which is not very healthy, I know, but I prefer that way.
Are there any drinks you drink in the summertime to cool down?
Yes, I do actually. I have a favorite. It's called Barbican. I've also tried this other drink, which is called Freeze. It's a brand that I've recently explored, and it has less sugar, so that's beneficial. And I also like drinking fresh lime juice or juices in general because they're healthier options.
What's the healthiest drink that you like to drink?
Smoothies. I love bringing leafy greens in general and putting them together. A great example of that would be spinach, kale, throw in some flax seeds in there, and a spoonful of honey, organic honey, obviously, and maybe with a fruit, and then mix it all up. And it's a very good option if you're into health.
Now let's talk about staying healthy. What do you do to stay healthy?
I make sure that I have a proper diet. I make sure to include protein in my meals. And I also try to eat clean green food, leafy greens, vegetables. I gravitate naturally towards vegetarian food because that's my personal choice and my personal opinion that I feel like if you were to eat animals, for example, it's not the healthiest options. And I could go on and on about that, but I'm sure not everyone agrees. I also try to include lots of nuts and exercise. You have to get your workout in. It's a must.
How often do you exercise?
Every day, I exercise for about an hour and a half. Even on days that I don't feel that motivated, I try to walk it out or get on the treadmill for a bit. Or I could do some basic yoga poses with my mom, and that makes me feel less guilty about skipping my workout.
In your country, what's the most popular way to keep fit?
I feel like a lot of people in my country prefer walking. That's something that brings people together in a way as well. Friends decide to meet up for a walk, for example, or older women or older men in general, they prefer meeting up for an evening walk or a morning walk. So I think walking is one of the things that we like to do a lot.
Now let's talk about cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you like to cook or do you like to eat out?
I love cooking, but I also like to eat out. However, if I had to pick one, I would pick cooking because I feel like it's an outlet for me and it's very therapeutic. I like creating something with my own hands, and it gives me a sense of joy. And I also love feeding people. So I love cooking for my friends or for my family, or if there is something specific that they crave or that they love, I love to be the one who's cooking it for them.
Did you learn to cook when you were a child?
Um,
Before we continue, I have a gift for you. I've analyzed hundreds of Band 9 transcripts from our successful VIP students, and I've put the 100 most used words into a PDF for you. If you want that, go to the description or the pinned comment. You can download it for free.
I wouldn't say so. I started cooking when I turned 18 or 19, or probably 17. I can't recollect, but it was a passion that I found out I had after because I used to be really interested when my parents were cooking, and I would always want to know how to do the next step. And then I started watching cooking videos online, and then I caught myself watching cooking shows, and that's when I knew I really love cooking.
Are there any cuisines that you would like to learn how to cook in the future?
I would love to learn how to cook Arabic food. I feel like their food is so flavorful, but their way of cooking is a bit different than the way we cook in India. And it's simpler. Um, so I would like to know their thought process and how they cook their meats, for example, or how they blanch their vegetables, or how they put together a meal in one, because it's usually layers. It's at least the food that I like. It's usually in layers. So I would like to learn the technique that they use for that.
If someone from a different country was visiting your home, what would you cook them that would give them a good idea of food and cuisine from your local area?
Okay, so I would cook butter chicken for them. I'd like to think that I cook really good butter chicken. Um, after all the compliments that I've gotten. And I love to eat it as well. I mean, imagine I would create that meal with my own hands and then share the joy with every single person in the room. And that feeling is inexplainable. Last month, I got myself a bookshelf, and I got it online. I was a bit hesitant before I got it because I just had my doubts if whether or not it will be the perfect bookcase. However, it turned out to be something I really adore in my room. I wanted to sort of make my own mini library because I love reading books. And I had a bookshelf before this, but it was smaller, and I wanted to expand since I have more books now. And it's something that brings me a lot of joy. And in my free time, I like just browsing through my bookcase and seeing which book I'd like to pick. So I've categorized everything this time, and it's just something that brings me so much joy. I chose this particular thing because I feel like even when I will grow older, I feel like I can always share this joy with other people. And they're also going to be intrigued when they come over to see what books I have. And it sort of also gives an insight to my personality and the things that I like or dislike and the things that I like to learn about. And I would also get to know them better by the book choices they make. It's just how my thought process works.
That's the end of part 2, and we're going to move on to part 3 now. So we've been talking about something you bought for your home. We're going to continue to talk about creating a nice home. Why do some people love buying lots of things for their home?
I feel like every single time that they see something new, they instantly want to have it, and it ends up at home. And some of the times you grow out of it, and but you still have an emotional connection to whatever it is that you bought, and it just ends up there or gets passed on. And I think that's why people buy a lot of things. Sometimes they don't even need that much stuff.
Do you need to spend a lot of money on a home to make it look nice?
No, I don't think so. Nowadays, people are a lot more into recycling and doing things themselves. So, what I mean is, they like to DIY things at home. And I'm a big supporter of that. I believe we should do that often, because there are so many things that end up in the wastelands that are not even supposed to be there and that can be reused and for years, honestly. So, to answer your question, I feel like you don't need to spend a lot of money. You can DIY stuff, or you can thrift even, I believe.
Why do some people not care at all about how their home looks?
I feel like it has a lot to do with how they're feeling emotionally, internally. It doesn't have much to do with their home, but it's just that they lack motivation to get up and to tidy up their space. And it can happen to the best of us. I also feel like sometimes you need the right motivation to get up and make your space feel like home, because sometimes people don't feel like they belong internally because they're going through things, so even a home doesn't feel like a home for them, and hence I feel like they don't really put in much efforts.
Now let's talk about different types of homes. Do you think it's better to live in an apartment or a house?
It depends where you're located. I have lived in an apartment and I've also lived in a home. Both were really, really nice. Apartments feel a bit shared. However, home feels like this is your space and your family space. That's how I felt. Growing up, we lived in a home back in my country, and it felt like, okay, these four walls are like our thing. This is our house. But in apartments, like you have to make sure that you're careful about everything you're doing because you live with a lot of other people in the same building.
How do you think homes will change in the future?
As I can see from now, buildings are growing everywhere. So I feel like a lot more apartments are available compared to back in the days. And a lot of homes are available as well. So I feel like it's a 50-50, but I would still lean more towards buildings. I feel a lot of buildings are being constructed lately than they used to back in the days.
Do you agree that the type of home that people prefer changes as they get older?
Yes, I do agree. For me, at least, I live in an apartment now, but when I grow older, I would love to have my own home. I would love to see my kids grow up there, and I would love to have my own little patio. I would love to have my, like I said, like own little things. It's just a mental thing.
One thing I want to talk about with you is everybody has different personalities and everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. One thing that I've noticed with you is you really shine when you can relate things to feelings and emotions. I'm the opposite. I can't talk about feelings and emotions. So if you asked me to do it, I don't think I would get a band 9. I'm very analytical and I'm good at discussing stories and examples and things like that's how I relate to the world. But for you, every time you talk about emotions, you shine. You're able to be really fluent and you can really dig deep into that
I
topic.
agree.
So anytime you are doing the test and you feel a little bit stuck, try and move the conversation towards maybe not even how you feel, but how other people feel. When you're discussing in part 3 questions, you do talk about your other people's feelings a lot. And you tend to find that much, much easier. I just find it really interesting that different students can more easily talk about different things. And for you, do you feel that way?
Yeah, I
You do feel that way.
100%. I agree. I agree.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Chris.
If you want to see Isha's other Band 9 performances, click here or here.
Hi, everyone. Right, thank you. That's it for tonight. Same time tomorrow. Final ones. If you got any questions, put your hands up, please. Thanks, Boniface. Okay, thanks. I hope it was helpful. See you tomorrow.